The most heartbreaking words most of the stroke patients I've ever met. Felt completely fine the day before. No pain. No dizziness. No falling down. Just another ordinary morning. But suddenly, they couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Couldn't say their own name. I'm a brain specialist, with over 20 years of treating and caring for older adults. And to this day, what shocks me the most is not the stroke itself, but the last words they say to me before everything collapses: "I'm still fine, doctor." Have you ever heard that sentence before? From your parents. From your spouse. From yourself. A sentence that seems harmless yet often shows up just hours before the brain stops functioning normally. I still remember Mr. Walter, 68 years old. That night, he FaceTimed his granddaughter. Waving his hand, telling funny stories from his youth. And the next morning, he looked at me. Mouth stiff. Right arm dropped. He couldn't say another word. His wife just kept repeating through her tears, "He was still healthy last night." Dear friend, this is not a rare story. It happens every day. In thousands of families. And the scariest part is, the brain still speaks, but through very small signs. Signs that you, I, and many of us have ignored. Brief slurred speech that goes away. One arm suddenly feels slightly weak, mixing up names of kids or grandkids. One side of the face slightly uneven when smiling, feeling unusually sleepy during the day. These things are not just aging. They are the brain's final whispers before it goes silent. And today, I'll share with you 5 earliest signs of a minor stroke that many people don't recognize. A map to help you preserve your memory, your voice, and your independence. You deserve to receive that message one day earlier. You or someone you love could be saved, simply by noticing that little thing in time. And to help you see this is not just theory, let me tell you more about Mr. Walter's story. Just one evening before everything changed. Last night he was laughing. This morning he couldn't say a word. The brain whispered, but no one listened. Mr. Walter is one of the patients I will never forget. Not because his condition was too severe, but because the last moment he could still speak was a moment no one realized was a warning sign. That evening, he stood on the porch, FaceTiming his granddaughter in Boston. "It's Grandpa. Do you remember me?" He waved his hand, laughing joyfully. After the call, he turned to Mrs. Helen, his wife, and told an old story from when he drove trucks across the states. Everything seemed normal. Even happier and healthier than usual. Then he got up by himself, watered the plants, washed the glasses, locked the door, and wished his wife good night. Still walking steadily like a man nearly 70 who had never been sick, still confident and independent. Mrs. Helen said, "He even promised to drive me to the market the next morning." No strange signs. No one was alarmed. But the next morning, he sat still at the dining table. Not reading the newspaper, but frozen in place, right arm hanging limp. When his wife called out, he turned his head, eyes still alert. But when he tried to open his mouth, only a trapped breath came out. No sound. No word. His mouth had slanted clearly to the right. Mrs. Helen thought he was choking and quickly poured him some water. But his hand couldn't lift. The spoon dropped to the floor. His mouth twisted more. His eyes filled with panic. He was no longer the cheerful Walter from the night before, but a Walter trapped inside his own body, unable to speak. Unable to call his wife. Unable to say his granddaughter's name. The ambulance came. MRI showed, he had a stroke on the left hemisphere, the language center. Time of detection, 2 hours too late for the golden window. We could only minimize the damage, not save the entire affected brain region. That afternoon, Mr. Walter was still conscious. I entered the hospital room, and he tried to look at me. His mouth moved slightly. I saw the fear and helplessness in his eyes. But no sentence. Not a single full word came out. Mrs. Helen held my hand, the hand of someone who had lived with him for over 40 years, and she said, "Last night he was still so healthy, doctor. How did it come to this?" I've heard that sentence many times. But each time, it makes my heart sink. Because I know, Mr. Walter didn't just suddenly become like this. His brain had whispered earlier. Maybe a moment of mixing up words. A brief weakness in his right hand while opening a bottle. A slight misstep when turning into a dark hallway. But no one listened. And that's why I want you to stay with me today. Because what happened to Mr. Walter could have been prevented. If only the brain's signals had been noticed just one day earlier. But the question is, how does the brain speak up? And why do so many people miss those first signs? The answer will come in the next part. And it could help you save yourself or someone you love before voice and memory fade away. Subtle signs the brain's whisper before words are lost. I once asked Mrs. Cheryl, 72 years old, living in Sacramento, when she first felt something was off. She paused for a moment and said, "I think it was the day I called my granddaughter by the wrong name. I knew clearly she's Emily, but my mouth kept calling her Amanda." I just laughed it off. But inside, I felt something was really wrong. No one thought it was an issue at that moment. Just a minor memory slip. Then one morning, while pouring coffee, she dropped the glass pot. "My hand just wouldn't obey," she said. It only happened once, then everything seemed normal, so she ignored it. One afternoon, taking pictures with old friends, someone joked, "Why is your smile crooked on one side, Cheryl?" She looked in the mirror at home. One side of her cheek really didn't lift when she smiled. But she thought maybe it was from being tired, sleeping on one side, or just aging. Then there's Mr. Kenneth, 74 years old, in Oregon, who said he almost slipped while stepping from the hallway into the kitchen. "My legs didn't hurt, no dizziness, but I just couldn't control them," he said. He thought it was the slippery floor. But then it happened again a few days later when he got up from the sofa. Some people like Mrs. Linda in New Jersey shared that for a whole week, she would feel overwhelmingly sleepy right after lunch. "I never used to nap during the day," she said. "But that week, I could barely sit 10 minutes without my eyes closing." She thought it was the summer heat. But 2 weeks later, she had a minor stroke, lost her balance, and fell in her backyard. Do you see it? Those signs were all so small. But they weren't meaningless. They were the brain knocking on the door. Not urgent. Not loud. But very real. And what haunts me is that nearly all of them told me the same sentence after they recovered: "Doctor, I actually did feel something. But I didn't think it was serious." They didn't ignore it out of carelessness. They ignored it because they were used to feeling tired, making mistakes, getting older. Because no one ever told them that those tiny errors were survival signals. Dear friend, if you or someone close to you ever had a moment of mixing up words, forgetting names, slight hand weakness, or unusual daytime drowsiness, don't brush it off. Because that little thing might be the last chance to keep your voice, your memory, and your freedom. But what haunts me even more is how the brain fooled them. They thought they were fine, while the damaged brain region had already gone quiet. So why does the brain hide it? The answer is in the next part, where the truth even sent shivers down my spine. Why do you still feel fine right before a stroke? The brain is the only organ that can hide its own illness. You can clearly feel it when your heart aches, or your lungs struggle for air. But with the brain you won't know when it starts to go quiet. I once cared for a man named George, 75 years old, in Colorado. The day before he was hospitalized with a stroke, he still drove himself to the market. He walked around the park, played Sudoku every morning. No headaches, no dizziness, no weakness. And when his wife cried while calling 911 because he suddenly slurred his speech, he still tried to say, "I'm okay. I'm fine." Why did he still feel fine even while the left side of his brain was severely deprived of blood? The answer lies in a special but dangerous feature of the brain, the compensation mechanism. Your brain can fill in the gaps using other regions. The brain isn't one solid block, but billions of interconnected networks. When one area starts losing blood, nearby areas activate to compensate, like neighbors rushing in to help put out a fire. If the language center pauses, the brain temporarily borrows another region to finish your sentence. If one arm weakens, the motor center on the other side tries to balance things out. It sounds miraculous. But that's exactly why it's dangerous. Because you don't see clear symptoms. You can still speak but slightly slurred. Still walk but with a shaky step. Still feel alert but unusually tired. And you think, "I'm still okay." But in truth your brain is working double time. It's struggling silently, not letting you know. Until there's no region left to compensate, the stroke hits, taking away everything you once saw as normal. Like a termite-infested bridge, still standing until the very last minute, then suddenly collapsing. Dear friend, I'm not telling you this to scare you, but to help you become more aware of yourself. If one morning your voice sounds different, if one day you feel unusually drowsy, or your hand trembles while pouring tea, don't brush it off. That's not just getting old. It could be your brain fighting to keep you steady. So if the brain doesn't send clear alarms, how can you protect yourself? The answer isn't in expensive tests, but begins with small daily actions, things you can start doing as early as tomorrow morning. And I'll walk you through each step. Starting now. Small actions saving a whole life. If a bridge is about to collapse, you'll hear it creak. If a car has trouble, warning lights flash. But when the brain is about to have a stroke, it's silent. No lights. No alarms. Just a deadly quiet. I still remember Mr. William, 72, in Nevada. That morning, he felt dizzy and fell right outside his bathroom. Thought it was just low blood pressure. But in reality, it was a transient ischemic attack. The next day, he came to my clinic, his hands still trembling, his mouth still stiff. His eyes carried a heavy, unspoken question, if only I had known sooner. And what breaks my heart most is that many of those strokes could have been prevented, if we started earlier with the smallest things on that very morning. I told Mr. William, and I'm telling you today, you don't need to wait for a headache to drink water. You don't need to wait for a racing heart to start breathing deeply. You don't need to wait for someone in your house to have a stroke to start caring for your brain. The first action I always recommend to patients: drink a glass of water as soon as you wake up. It sounds simple, but while you sleep, your body gets dehydrated, your blood thickens. A warm glass of water helps thin the blood, pump it to the brain more easily, reducing the risk of silent clots forming overnight. Did you know over 80% of strokes happen in the morning? Just one glass of water could be the line between "I'm fine" and "I can't speak anymore." Then I tell them about Mrs. Ruth, 68, in Oregon. She struggled with sleep disorders for years, saw many doctors. I didn't prescribe medication. I simply said, each morning, don't make coffee right away. Open the curtains and let the morning light touch your eyes first. 3 weeks later, she said she was sleeping better without pills. Morning light doesn't just brighten the room, it wakes up the part of the brain that controls your biological clock. Something that seems so small, yet it regulates blood pressure, heart rate, and mood. Light doesn't just warm your skin, it warms the parts of the brain quietly under strain. And don't forget your neck. I once met Mr. Hector, 74, Texas, who always felt dizzy when standing up. Turns out, his neck arteries were slightly compressed in the morning. I taught him a simple move: gently massage the back of the neck, circle behind the ears, breathe slowly for 5 minutes. After 1 month, he told me, "Now I can stand up without needing to grab the chair." A pair of hands used right can be your first doctor. For those afraid of memory loss, I share the story of Gloria, 70, New Jersey. She worried because her sister had Alzheimer's. Every morning, I told her to say out loud, "I am alive. I am well. I am grateful." Each time you speak, the language, emotional, and motor areas of your brain activate together. After 2 months, Gloria didn't just feel clearer in memory, she felt like she had a reason to start each day. One sentence can be your thread to memory, to the present, to hope. And the last thing often forgotten: call someone even with no reason. Mr. Peter, 75, Chicago, lived alone, rarely spoke. He didn't feel sad, but his brain was slowly shutting down. I told him to call someone each week, just to say "I miss you." After a few weeks, his memory improved. The brain needs connection like trees need water. Loneliness, silence are fertile ground for strokes and cognitive decline. All of these things: drinking water, catching sunlight, massaging the neck, speaking gratitude, calling someone, cost nothing. But if you skip them, the price might be your voice, your memory, or your whole life. You don't need to change everything at once. You just need to start one small thing, tomorrow morning. And repeat it, every day. Because each morning you wake up is a chance. And every choice you make is a wall protecting your brain from silent threats. But even if you do all these things right, there's still one more danger I must tell you about. A silent mistake, common and so damaging I can't stay silent anymore. And that mistake starts with a belief you've held for far too long. Are you ready to hear it? The silent mistake and the heavy price to pay. I once had a patient named Joe, 66 years old, living in Colorado. He was very meticulous. Ate well. Walked every day. Slept early. To others, he was the perfect picture of healthy aging. Yet that morning, he collapsed while making coffee. Ischemic stroke, language area affected. He had to relearn how to speak. When he woke up, the first thing he asked me was, "What did I do wrong, doctor?" The heartbreaking answer is this: Joe didn't do anything wrong, but he believed something wrong. The most common mistake I see in older adults is the belief that, if I don't notice anything unusual, I must be fine. No headaches, no shaky hands, no slurred speech, no facial droop, so they think they're healthy. But did you know? 80% of minor strokes happen without leaving immediate marks. Many people still walk, talk, eat and collapse just one night later. The brain isn't like the heart. It doesn't ache when it's hurt. It doesn't spasm when in danger. It just quietly retreats, bit by bit, region by region, connection by connection. You don't notice you're losing language until you can't speak. You don't notice memory fading until you forget the way home. You don't notice reduced blood flow to the brain until you collapse on the kitchen floor, like Joe did. The problem isn't the obvious symptoms. The problem is the small, repeating changes that quietly show up each day. Do you often feel sleepy in the morning? Do you get dizzy for a few seconds when standing up? Do you forget simple words? Do you repeat an action and not remember if you've done it already? Don't ignore it. That's not just aging. That's your brain whispering, "I need help." So what should we do? I'm not advising monthly expensive tests. I'm not asking you to worry every minute. I'm simply inviting you to shift how you see yourself. Don't wait for a symptom to take action. Look for patterns that repeat. When a small sign returns day after day, pause and ask, "Why is my brain sending me this signal?" And from there, begin to adjust, sleep 15 minutes earlier, drink one more glass of water at noon, call a friend once a week, write down 3 things you're grateful for each day. You don't need to see blood to know you're bleeding inside. Listen to the whisper before it turns into a scream. There's something I haven't dared to tell you yet. Because almost everyone over 60 is unknowingly doing it every day. A habit as light as a breath, yet silently shrinking the brain area that holds the names of the people you love most. And if you've ever hesitated when calling your grandchild's name, please stay, because what I'm about to share could change how you protect your memory starting tomorrow. A habit that seems harmless but slowly shrinks your memory. I still remember that afternoon at the clinic, when Mrs. Margaret, 69 years old, walked in with a gentle smile. She said, "I feel fine, doctor, it's just that lately I keep forgetting my grandkids' names." Then she smiled softly, as if trying to brush off the worry creeping into her heart. I asked her, "When was the last time you told your grandkids an old story?" She paused for a few seconds. Then quietly replied, "Probably a long time ago. The kids are always on their phones now, and I feel shy." And right then, I realized a subtle shift that's quietly happening in many older adults. They stop telling stories. They stop repeating old memories. They stop calling their loved ones by name every day. Did you know, the part of your brain that stores long-term memories and recognizes loved ones is called the hippocampus? It's like a memory shelf. If you want it to stay clean, you have to touch it every day. Every time you retell a story, you're dusting off your brain. Every time you call someone by name, you're keeping that shelf from collapsing. But when you stay silent, when you just watch TV, when you read without speaking, you're letting that hippocampus wither day by day without even knowing it. Not suddenly. Not painfully. Just. Today you forget your keys. Tomorrow, a missed appointment. Then one day, you look at someone you love and can't say their name. I don't say this to scare you. I say it because I want you to know, you can reverse this starting today. Tell your grandkids an old story. Say their names, one by one, every day. Write down 3 things you clearly remember from the day before every evening. Don't think of it as something small. Because the brain doesn't need grand gestures. It just needs you to speak. To connect. To relive memory with love. I once told Mrs. Margaret, "You're not losing your memory. You've just let it be forgotten for too long." 2 months later, she came back. This time, she brought a small notebook filled with her grandkids' names and little stories. She said, "Now I remember them more and they remember me better too." Maybe you don't need a notebook. But you do need someone to talk to. Because memory doesn't live alone. It needs others to survive. And there's one more thing I want to tell you, something your loved ones may never say out loud. A mistake born from love. But one that can quietly push your family away both physically and emotionally. Do you want to know what it is? It's not inside your body, but in the way you act when you think, "I don't want to bother anyone." A gentle lifestyle and a brain that breathes in rhythm. I understand. We've all had those mornings where we open our eyes, look around, and think, "I'm still fine today." But sometimes, that fine is just the quiet of something slowly fading, and we don't even realize it. Like a song missing a high note, only the composer knows something is missing. You don't need to live in fear. I don't want you waking up every morning worried, "Will today be the day I collapse?" No. The brain doesn't need your fear. It just needs a little more gentleness from you. Morning is a gift that time gives to those who've lived through many seasons. So when you open your eyes, don't rush. Don't jump out of bed like you're late for a train. You're not in a hurry for anyone anymore. Let your body have the chance to signal, "I'm ready." Just sit there for a few minutes, let your heartbeat settle, let your mind hear your breath. Sometimes, those few minutes might be what keeps you here longer. One of my patients once said, "Doctor, what I fear most is forgetting my grandchild's name." I just smiled and replied, "Then each morning, instead of fearing it, say their name out loud. Not to test your memory, but to keep love present in your brain." No habit is too small. No action is meaningless if it makes you feel truly present. Sip warm water and smile. Write a note, "Today, I'm still here." Make a call, tell an old story. You're not doing those things for others. You're keeping your brain anchored to this world one day at a time. Dear friend, don't wait until you've lost your words to cherish each sentence. Don't wait until your memory fades to realize you could have done something. Be gentle but intentional. If you simply begin, if you take just one unrushed morning, you've already taken a great step toward protecting your memory and your brain's blood vessels. Because some people don't get that chance anymore. And when I walk into the emergency room and see them lying there, I know they too once thought, "I was fine yesterday." Are you ready for the final part? I'm going to tell you the things no one wants to hear but everyone needs to know. So that no one has to say the words "if only." You deserve to wake up every day, every breath. Do you remember? We began this journey with a sentence that has haunted me through 2 decades of practicing medicine. Yesterday, I still felt completely fine. That seemingly harmless sentence was actually the last thing many patients said before they could no longer speak. We've walked through the tiniest signs, from a hand that hesitated to move, from words suddenly slurring, from tired eyes, from the dizziness when standing too fast. The things that seem trivial were actually the brain's first whispers for help. Then we paused on morning habits where just one sip of water, one deep breath, one slow moment, can be enough to preserve the fragile life you didn't even know was at risk. And I know, you don't need to be lectured. You just need someone to gently remind you each day that you deserve to live with awareness. You deserve to be loved while you're still healthy. You don't need to wait until you've lost something to start protecting it. I'm not here to alarm you. I'm just someone who's witnessed too many late realizations. And I hope you won't become one of them. If you've made it this far, I believe you're not alone. You've chosen a different way to live, not rushing, not leaving it to chance, not staying silent. If something in this message touched you, please hit like, leave a comment about one thing you want to change starting tomorrow, and share this with a friend or loved one over 60, because you might be the reason they stay in this life a little longer. And if you need a steady companion, follow the channel Thrive 60+. We're here not to teach you how to live, but to live more deeply with you each day. A healthy brain isn't one that's never been hurt, it's a brain that you've listened to at the right time. And this moment is one of those times. There is still so much to live for. Let's begin again starting today.